Reisinger, a board member for the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council. I'll be hosting the program today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge those who make these forums possible. First, thanks to our members, volunteers, and interns. We are also deeply grateful to our university and community sponsors. They are the University of Iowa Honors Program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, the University of Iowa International Programs, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization. They provide critical financial support. Thank you as well to today's special sponsors, Alice and Ken Atkinson, Conrad Schultz, Alan Swanson, and Blank & McCune Realtors. We also appreciate City Channel 4 professionally recording our programs for cablecast on City Channel 4 or 118-2 and the U of I Library's digital archives. For access to our past presentations and other programmings, we recommend that you like City Channel 4 on Facebook. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Katina Lillios. She's an archaeologist who is currently professor and chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Iowa. She completed her BA in Archaeology and Art History from Boston University, then received her PhD in Anthropology from Yale University. Katina studies how people use their material world to create social identities and cultural differences. She's devoted her career to exploring this question for the peoples of the Iberian Peninsula from the Neolithic through the Bronze Ages, that is 4000 to 1500 BCE, a period of profound social and climate changes. Through archaeological excavation and the study of artifacts, and often working in collaboration with interdisciplinary teams, she has expanded our knowledge of how people of the past used such things as heirlooms, sacred objects, and ancestral burials to shape their futures. So please join me in welcoming Professor Lillios.
Thank you very much, Bill, and all of you who are here today. I guess I don't need to introduce myself, but yes, I'm Katina Lillios, and an archaeologist and in the Department of Anthropology as chair beginning this year. I wanted to make a couple of plugs. First of all, our department is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. It was founded in 1969, so I just wanted to kind of let you all know about this. In the spring, on May 1st, we're going to be having some celebrations with alumni and former faculty I think we're holding it at the Old Capitol Museum. So if you're around, you're certainly welcome to come to that. The second little plug is my book that just came out recently. If you're interested or want to follow up on the archaeology of the Iberian Peninsula, my book just came out entitled The Archaeology of the Iberian Peninsula from the Paleolithic through the Bronze Age. This was, as you can imagine, a huge effort, and I'm really pleased that it's finally come out. I haven't actually seen it yet, which is a very strange feeling, but I do know it's out. The book is also an important sort of transition point for the talk today, because it was in finishing up the book and checking on some information with a colleague, a Spanish colleague, that this whole project that I'm going to talk with you about kind of evolved. So as many of us, who do research, when something finishes, you're kind of wondering what's going to be next, what is going to be your next big project, and this is exactly what happened. I was finishing up basically the last chapter on the Bronze Age, and I had a question about a particular site, the site of Castillejo del Bonete, that I'm going to speak about. I wrote to the Spanish archaeologist, Luis Benitez de Lugo, who's been excavating the site for 15 years. As a result, an out came, from this conversation over email, to check on some information that I had written down, an invitation from Luis to participate on the excavations at the site, which, sort of was an amazing thing. I had never really worked in that part of Spain or the Iberian Peninsula before. I didn't have a project, in mind. I wanted something that I could involve my students in. So I pursued that. And what you're going to hear today are basically sort of, you might say the results of the past year's work on this excavation and this project. I should say that the project and the kind of collaboration that I've developed with Luis and the involvement of students, and you'll hear from one of them today, is the outcome of a grant that I applied for from international programs, and I'm glad to see Downing is here, a new funding initiative called the Global Research Partnership Awards, which allow for faculty to develop, partnerships with long-term potentials, and I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to be awarded one of those grants, and what you're going to hear is sort of the results of that. Okay, so basically I'm going to be focusing on the relationship between climate and culture change in the ancient past, and in particular the Iberian Peninsula. And it's really exciting for me to, in some ways, revisit this interest, because in some ways this is where my dissertation research kind of was situated. I was interested in the changes that happened in Iberia between around 3000 and 2000 or 1500 or so BC. And, I've been able to kind of revisit this question in sort of a new way through the excavations at Castillejo de Bonete. So just a brief outline. Can you all see the words there? Yeah, maybe the lights, less lights would be better. Just a bit of a roadmap on what I'll be covering today. That's helpful. Good. So first, a bit of background on this really exciting time period in the past. Everybody, I think, has a favorite ancient time period. Well, my favorite time period is the 3rd millennium BCE. It's a very, very interesting time. Lots of things were happening, and I think you'll learn more why. So I'll talk a little bit about the cultural and climate changes that took place during this time. Then I'll turn to the site of Castillejo de Bonete. And again, I'm sort of a recent visitor, recent participant on these excavations. Luis Benitez de Lugo is the primary director of these projects. So, all the wonderful things you're going to learn about the site are due to his work and his collaborations. And I'm just sharing this good work. Then we'll talk a little bit about why I find Castillejo de Bonete such an interesting site. It's because it's a ritual site, it's a ceremonial site, it's a religious site, but it was used through a period of pretty profound climate change, a mega drought, actually. So you'll see why I find this site sort of interesting and why I think it's an important question to ask. I'll talk a little bit about some of the future work that I'd like to develop as a result of this experience and what I've learned this past year. And then I'll turn to one of the students that participated on the summer project, the excavation, Jackie O'Neill, and she'll talk a little bit about what this project has meant for her. Okay. So first, let's get situated. The Iberian Peninsula, of course, is the term we use to refer to the modern-day countries of Portugal and Spain. The region that I'll be primarily speaking about is that sort of yellow blob there, the southern Meseta, the region of La Mancha, Spain. So the time period that we'll be looking at, again, 3rd millennium, or so, we call the Copper Age in Iberia. It's the period when, yes, we start to see copper being used, but that's not really the most important thing about this time period. The map shows you the location of sites, archaeological sites that we know of that date to this time period, and what some of these sites look like. So what was happening during this time is people were fully modern humans, so people like you and me. They were farming peoples, they were herding peoples, they were peoples who manufactured wonderful objects in clay and pottery, in metals, in stone. They often settled on hilltops, fortified hilltops, like the one you see on the right, Los Millares in Spain. They also established what we call ditched enclosures. This is what you see over there, the site of Perdigões in Portugal. So these were not situated on hills and not using stone for construction, but the people in the past carved, ditches in the soil, sometimes multiple lines of ditches, and established themselves at these places. These were probably ceremonial centers or aggregation places where people came to, perhaps for feasting and important rituals. But it was an interesting time. Social inequality, social differences seem to be quite marked by this point, which is one of the reasons I'm interested in this time period. You see clearly people that are accessing some pretty spectacular goods at this time, elites, chiefs, whatever we want to call them, making and using things in gold and ivory. They were trading with North Africa at this time and accessing some pretty special materials from there. So it was an interesting time of, the emergence of social difference and new kinds of identity. So at 2200 BCE, things changed. And they didn't just change in Iberia, they changed in many places of the world. In Iberia, we call this the beginning of the early Bronze Age. It is a time when we start to see the beginnings of bronze manufacture. But I think more importantly, you see really profound changes in where people lived and how they buried their dead. They abandoned those settlements largely that they had established in the third millennium. They just left them behind and established new settlements in different parts of the peninsula. Some of these are really highly fortified settlements, like the site of La Bastida de la Totana in southeast Spain. They established in central Spain, in the La Mancha region, these things called motillas, and we're going to hear more about motillas. Motillas are probably not settlements. It's not clear exactly how they function, but they were built-up spaces that just began to be constructed, again, beginning around 2200 BCE. And many of them are associated with these deep wells, and that's going to be an important part of this story. Material culture, pottery particularly, changes dramatically. All the lovely decoration of the pots of the Copper Age kind of disappears. They go into this kind of undecorated world in their ceramics, and it's really, really a profound change. And again, this map shows you the location of all the known and dated sites that we have, or most of them, probably not all of them. So you can kind of see big change, right, in where people lived, the kind of material culture they're using. Also, their burials changed. So in the Copper Age, they were burying in collective tombs. The dead were placed together in groups, in caves, in large stone structures that we call megaliths. In the early Bronze Age, they go to individual graves, many of them underneath people's houses. So lots of things are changing. I don't know if you want to call it a revolution, but certainly a profound transformation in the social world. Why did this happen? As you can imagine, there are many ideas out there, but the one idea that I would like to explore a little bit today is the relationship between a major climatic event that it kind of makes its appearance at this time and these changes. And this event is known to climate scientists as the 4.2 KYA event, basically the event that occurred 4,200 years ago, also known as the Bond Event 3. And what you see on this map from another publication are places where this event has been documented. So you can see this as a global phenomenon. If you notice carefully, Iberia is not even covered there, but it indeed is documented in the Iberian Peninsula as well. What happened during this 4.2 KYA event? Different things in different places, but the hatched areas that you see on this map, the hatched ones, are the areas that were affected by drought or dust storm. So a period of aridification. And for many folks, this is considered a mega drought, which means it lasted for over 2 decades, sometimes multiple hundreds of years. So you can imagine this was a serious transformation in the climatic landscape, environmental landscape. It's often associated in many of these regions with migrations, large movements of people, because obviously if you have drought for that long a time, you just cannot stay in the same place. So in Iberia, here, just a few books that show you, how in recent years, attention on this 4.2 KY event has become of increasing interest to archaeologists and climate scientists. So here are a few books that are dedicated to this event and its relationship to collapse or at least social change in the ancient past. So yes, it does occur in Iberia. It's been documented in the Iberian Peninsula, not by me or any. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm an archaeologist. I work as part of many interdisciplinary sort of teams. But the pollen scientists, the hydrologists, the soil scientists, the geomorphologists, all kind of come together and basically have determined that this is an event that can be documented in the Iberian Peninsula. Knowing that, a few years ago, I assembled a group of colleagues and collaborators, including a pollen scientist, also known as a palynologist, to work on a kind of Iberian scale, mega scale study that looked at the relationship between this event, the 4.2 KYA event, and the archaeology of the peninsula using radiocarbon dates. Now, radiocarbon dates are, dates that you get of things that were once alive, right? Humans, plants, animals. But they can also be used as what we call proxies of events. So you have a lot of radiocarbon dates that appear for a certain time period. Many of us as archaeologists would translate that as, a lot of human activity is happening, okay? So these dates, these assemblages of dates can be used as proxies of population sizes. And so what we did in this sort of big scale study is we took all the available radiocarbon dates for the Iberian Peninsula. This took about 5 years to put together, FYI. And we looked at how this event shaped the archaeology or the population sizes, the demographics in different regions of the Iberian Peninsula. That's what those three colored, plots are over there, the three regions of the peninsula, with the 4.2 KYA event sort of marked over there. And I think what you can see is that it did different things in different regions. It seems to be correlated with some kinds of population shifts in some regions, whereas in other regions, it didn't have as much of an impact. So I think that's an important takeaway, and it was kind of the first time anybody had really paid attention to the regional variability in the Iberian Peninsula with regard to this event. So let's turn a little bit to now La Mancha, the region where Castillejo del Bonete is. It's a really interesting part of Spain. Again, as I said, this was the first time I really spent much time there, because in the early Bronze Age, we see that the emergence, after this event or in association with this 4.2 KY event, the emergence of what we call a new culture, new kinds of settlement, the establishment of people in parts of the landscape that they had never gone to before. And again, this is known as the cultura de las motillas, the culture of the motillas. Motilla is just a name given to these sort of, round structures built usually in river valleys along the Guadiana River Valley. These are really exciting sites, very interesting sites. They're, as you can see from the photo that we took at one of these sites this summer, they're heavily built up sites. This is not something that involved 5 or 10 people on a lazy Saturday. This involved, some very deliberate, organization of labor. A real intentionality is sort of, implied by these sites. They were built, they were constructed, as I said, along river valleys, and in particular, and this is really important, where underground aquifers could be accessed relatively easily. So you can imagine in a period of drought, when your groundwater is becoming scarce, you want to be able to access that groundwater. So what these people did is they established themselves in this part of Spain, in a particular way with these big fortifications, but they dug into the ground sometimes up to 20 meters to access these underground aquifers. And in doing so, they obviously assured themselves as much as possible of a reliable water source for themselves, for their plants, and of course their animals as well. So this is a little bit about the landscape where Castillejo del Bonete is. So this takes us again to the site, Castillejo del Bonete. When the site was first discovered, it was thought to be a motilla, another one of these sites with a deep well that accessed these underground aquifers. But that wasn't the case, as Luis found out. There was no well that this site was accessing. Instead, what this site, this mounded site with these sort of circular structures that look kind of like a motilla, what it really was accessing or built over a cave that went underground and which they buried their dead. So basically what we're looking at here is a monumentalized ceremonial site built over a natural cave complex. They use this place not so much as a place to live, from what we can see, but as a place where the dead were buried, where rituals took place, where they, connected with their ancestors and their deities, whatever they were. What's really interesting about this site, for me in particular, is that there's evidence of use of this site for over 1,000 years, from before the 4.2 KY event and after. Okay, this is really exciting to me. You can't imagine how exciting this was because my dissertation site was basically occupied after the 4.2 KY event. Then I dug a burial site a few years ago in Portugal that was used before the 4.2 KY event. I was always trying to get the crossover. And then here's this site that has clear use through this period. Well, for an archaeologist, this is really exciting because you can look at change at one site. You can monitor change in people's practices and behaviors over a period of time in a pretty controlled way. So this is what I found really exciting about this project and why I was quite happy to participate on the excavations. So what I'm going to do now is show you a short video with English subtitles that Luis put together with his colleagues on the site. I probably won't show the whole one, but it explains to you the site and in much more detail than I can do right here. So hold on while I shift over to...
Do you want it full screen?
Yeah, why not? I did the subtitles to this. It was so...
Andalucía al Levante.
Castillejo del Bonete es un centro de ceremonias utilizado durante la prehistoria, en la Edad del Bronce, 2000 años antes de Cristo, para, en orientación al sol, enterrar a los muertos y legitimar la propiedad de la tierra.
Los trabajos de investigación que desde 2003 se están realizando de forma continuada en Castillejo del Bonete, con financiación del Ayuntamiento de Terrinches y de la Junta de Comunidades de Castilla-La Mancha, y se resumen en la excavación sistemática del yacimiento, su restauración y puesta en valor.
Como consecuencia de la ejecución, de la realización de la Carta Arqueológica de Terrinches, allá por el año 2000, en el 2003, empezamos a descubrir los primeros asentamientos, las primeras afloraciones, los primeros vestigios de yacimiento de Castillejo de Bonete.
Las excavaciones, que han abierto por el momento un área próxima a 850 metros cuadrados, han permitido descubrir un conjunto tumular prehistórico sin igual, utilizado, hasta donde hoy se sabe, durante casi un milenio.
Castillejo del Bonete es un lugar central alrededor del cual hay diversas aldeas, pequeñas agrupaciones de cabañas construidas con barro, paja, materiales vegetales y tierra, y todos ellos tenían en este lugar central ceremonial un lugar para comunicarse con la divinidad. Aquí veían a Dios y había una relación con el mundo espiritual en base a dos argumentos. El primer argumento es los difuntos, los muertos, y el segundo argumento es el sol, que era considerado una divinidad en aquella época, ¿no?
La trascendencia de los magníficos contextos materiales funerarios que se han hallado in situ son un relevante testimonio de las prácticas rituales y funerarias que en estos túmulos se produjeron durante la Edad del Bronce. El descubrimiento en 2004 de una abertura bajo el Gran Túmulo 1 posibilitó acceder a un complejo subterráneo de 90 metros cuadrados en las que existen 4 galerías, hallándose evidencias de la utilización funeraria de la cueva.
La galería 1 es principalmente de acceso al interior de la cueva. Al final de la galería 1, en el punto de contacto con la galería 2, encontramos un lugar de enterramiento, pero de enterramiento múltiple, con varios difuntos ahí enterrados. Pero se sacaron los huesos principales, dejaron los huesos más chiquitines, no tuvieron ánimo de exhaustividad, y allí enterradas nos hemos encontrado más de 30 cuentas de variscita que estaban asociadas a alguno de los enterramientos.
La excavación de la Galería 3, desarrollada entre los años 2016 y 2017, permitió documentar individuos en posición primaria de cúbito supino. La Galería 4, excavada en las campañas de 2017 y 2018, ha aportado enterramientos infantiles en Pitoy, en los que llaman la atención sus ajuares cerámicos, líticos y de hueso. En la Galería 2, la de mayor área y volumen, han podido documentarse hogueras, puntas líticas, piedras pulimentadas y puntas de cobre.
Este entorno en el que nos encontramos ha permanecido clausurado y cerrado desde la prehistoria hasta nuestros días. Lo hemos encontrado en el siglo XXI ya, con motivo de las excavaciones arqueológicas que estamos desarrollando, y colapsó la entrada en la misma prehistoria reciente, en la Edad del Bronce. Es decir, que nadie ha entrado aquí desde la prehistoria hasta nuestros días. Por eso, este lugar es una reserva arqueológica sin igual, para entender cómo funcionaba el medio ambiente en aquel momento y también cuál es el registro arqueológico, que está completamente inalterado, tal y como lo dejaron nuestros antepasados de la Edad del Bronce.
Llaman poderosamente la atención los trabajos de cantería que tuvieron que desarrollarse en el limitado espacio interior de la cueva, donde se alzaron muros de contención y diversos espacios funerarios, que en ocasiones precisaron del movimiento de ostostatos de grandes dimensiones y peso. El estudio antropológico ha sido realizado por el equipo forense de la Escuela de Medicina Legal de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Los estudios paleoambientales, desarrollados por el Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas, coinciden en ver en esta cueva una reserva arqueológica excepcional para conocer las relaciones entre los cambios climáticos y culturales durante la prehistoria reciente en el sur de Europa. El Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias ha revelado sorprendentes relaciones entre estas arquitecturas y el Sol.
So we can make sure that stuff. So hopefully you have a better sense of what the site is like, and what makes it really kind of a special site. So what do we know so far about the relationship between climate change in this region and ritual, at least as what we can tell from the site of Castillejo de Bonete? Well, this kind of investigation is really at its preliminary stages. Luis and his team and I are working on a paper right now that we hope to get, submitted in the next year or so. But the first stage, I thought, was to first put together all the radiocarbon dates for the site. Again, a radiocarbon date for at least the human burial is a proxy of a certain kind of an event. Obviously the death of a person, but also a ritual practice of some sort. So here on the left are the dates that thankfully my student Tong helped put all together and calibrate. And so what you can see, we have about, I think, 11 dates or so, is that there was an initial use of the site. In other words, initial use of the site as a burial site around 3000 BCE. There seems to be a little bit of a gap, and we're not sure if we're just missing dating on the bodies. But then it starts to get sort of more intensively used between about 2400 and 2000 BCE. There seems to be an intensification of use of the site as at least a burial site. So this is intriguing, right? We know that the site has other objects that sort of date to other time periods, but at least the use of it as a ritual site seems to intensify right about at the time of this climatic event. So I'm beginning to explore the idea that the sites, that people turn to the site increasingly as a place to, carry out rituals that would potentially bring water and better conditions to the region. Now, this kind of practice is actually really well known in different parts of the world. And again, my student Tong did a lot of interesting bibliographic research, gathering comparative data for other kinds of drought events in other parts of the world, because of course droughts happen and have happened and will continue to happen in many different parts of the world. For example, in a period of drought that occurred around 6,400 years ago in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, this was a period when basically farming could no longer be sustained. Pastoralism emerged. As the herding of domesticates became increasingly kind of a way people lived. We find that cattle sacrifices appear during this time. They were sacrificing these animals probably as a way to maybe change their environment. In the Catholic Church, I find, I've read about what are known as rogation ceremonies or propluvia, prayers that were carried out in order to increase rainfall or to have rainfall occur. These have been recorded very carefully in various churches in Spain between the 15th and 19th centuries. And these propluvia, these prayers, these incantations that have been recorded, correlate so strongly, so well with known drought events that they themselves can be used as proxies of when droughts occur. You could actually use these historical records to indicate when these droughts occur. So I would like to pursue this kind of line of reasoning, further with the site of Castillejo de Bonete, hopefully by getting some more dates on human remains and better understanding what other kinds of ritual practices took place at that site, and if they actually, intensified during this period, which would be kind of very intriguing, right? The use of ritual and offerings or burials as a way to change the world around them. So future directions, as I said, I'm working on a paper with my collaborators on the relationship between climate change and culture change at the site. One of my graduate students has been working with some of the ceramics from the site. I'm going to go back to Spain next summer and pursue some other possibilities using, previously excavated materials that we can hopefully date to, again, track the relationship between this climatic event and what people were doing at this site. So for the last, few minutes here, I just thought I would share with you a few pictures of the summer project. I probably didn't talk enough about that, but again, IP, International Programs, gave us a grant in order to basically run a study abroad program at the site. So I brought a group of students, all of whom had some Spanish background, a Spanish language background, or interest in the archaeology of the region. And there were six of them. As it happens, all women. And we spent roughly a month or so digging at the site, as well as, traveling to different sites in the region and museums in order to, understand the sort of basic context of the archaeology of the region. So I'm just going to show you a few slides of our summer, and then Jackie will speak a little bit about her experiences. So we all met in Madrid. Some of you probably have been to Madrid, but here we are. We met in Madrid, and thanks to Luis, he organized a series of tours for us in different important research facilities. So, for example, on the right there, we're at the Geological Institute for Geological and Mining Studies. Yes, I think you're right. Thank you. Which is an old, 19th century building, packed with rocks from all over Spain and minerals, and of course a fantastic library. That was a really, really wonderful trip. We also visited the forensic lab where the human remains from Castillejo de Bonete were being studied. That was also quite an interesting visit. Then we took the train to La Mancha, which is, as you can see, a place with windmills, and you can imagine Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, riding the plains there. Very, very compelling place, and as you can see from all the logos and images of Don Quixote, Cervantes, it's a very much an important part of the cultural history of this region. There's a view of from the town of Terinche. So one of the really, I think, special parts of this trip was, yes, the archaeology and all that, but we got to live in a town of about 600 people, this town of Terinches, which was about 2 kilometers from the site, and learned something about the region and the social life and cultural life of a small town in Spain, which made me think a lot about life in small town Iowa as well. Many of the challenges of small towns in Spain are shared with small towns in Iowa, right? Young people are leaving, there are fewer jobs, people are struggling to get people to stay, etc. But anyway, it's a beautiful, beautiful part of Spain. You're looking toward the south, toward Andalusia, a different region of Spain, also geologically a different region. So for an archaeologist, that's very exciting. You're kind of, the site of Castillejo de Bonete was actually kind of at a juncture between 2 different kinds of geological landscapes, which might have been seen as maybe 2 different social landscapes at that time. Different kinds of resources, different kinds of topography. So here are a few slides from the actual excavation itself. So we get up every day early, because it's hot, as you can imagine, in Spain in the summer. We would be there, was it 7:30 or so in the morning? And we'd get to work pretty quickly, and we'd be home by 1:30 or so. I mean, it just got too hot to work past then. So we came out there. There was a Spanish team that was also there that Luis put together. So there were about roughly 10 people working at the site, between maybe 10, 12 or so. A good opportunity to practice Spanish and English, depending which side you were on. Drones were used for a lot of the mapping. That was really an interesting component of the project, a very different kind of recording technology than what I'm used to from my own excavations. After we would dig during the day, we would eat and then take a siesta because it was really too hot to do anything else. And then we would go and wash the materials that we excavated during the day, mainly pottery, some stone as well. We spent a lot of time at the local swimming pool. So here's this town of 600 people, and it had a public, pool, which you can imagine was a pretty critical space for just keeping cool, but for gathering, right? It was the place to be at in the day, and particularly the evenings and the weekends. Everybody would come out, families with kids and teenagers, older folks, us, and so on. But yes, the temperatures that you can see that I photographed on my phone kind of tell you something about what it's like to live there. And in some ways it was good because it got us to think about the 4.2 KYA event, right? It was hot, it was dry, water was a precious resource, right? For drinking, for keeping cool, and so on. Oh, one thing that was really quite special also about the summers, we got a lot of media attention, which I was not quite used to and not always comfortable with. I don't like cameras and things, but we had film crews from local papers and national papers and taking pictures, interviewing us in Spanish. And, some of the students gave interviews in Spanish, and I thought that was just amazing. So it was just this really rich opportunity at many levels, not just about archaeology, but, just engaging, with the public about one's research and goings on. So I'm going to end my part here, but I think this might be a good opportunity for Jacqueline O'Neill, who participated with us this summer, to say a few words about what she learned from this experience and what she might take moving forward from it. Maybe we can turn on the lights now, unless you don't have a PowerPoint, do you?
No.
Okay. Could you flip on the lights? Great.
Wonderful. So I can see everybody. My time in Spain was a truly amazing experience. Not only just to see the rich history and culture in the area that we were in, we got to go to all sorts of sites as well as museums, and not only spanning just prehistory, but also recorded history and more recent histories of Spain, and to learn about the way that it affected also the Spanish team that we were in and to hear their opinions on things. But we also got to do a lot of work in Spanish, which for me was also a very important thing. We got to attend museums in Spanish, and all the TV was in Spanish, and everyone spoke to us in Spanish. And especially in the town of Terrinches, which was only about 600 people, like Katina mentioned, we made friends in Spanish. And seeing the way that the cultural differences played into the way that we communicated and the way that they interpreted what we were saying was something that I don't think that you could really get anywhere else. We learned that in Spanish, dogs go wow, 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 and chickens go kikiriki. And those small cultural differences kind of gave us a lot to talk about. And even in times where we were just kind of sitting around in the common area in the kind of house that we were living in, every single second was a learning experience that was different than anything else I've ever experienced, and probably anything that I ever will experience. It was a truly unique experience, and I don't think that it could be replicated in any other way. I don't know what else to talk about. Yeah, as well as the work and seeing the kind of archaeology in play, in action, and getting to dig around and find things for ourselves and being able to contribute to a project like Castillejo del Bonete was truly amazing, and it opened my eyes to an entirely different field of research and different applications of techniques that I've only been able to see on a screen or hear told about, and that was really amazing as well. So yeah, if there's any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise,
Thank you, Jack.
All right, looks like we're ready to begin. Can you please discuss possible problems of disturbing a burial site, a problem in Iowa when studying Native American culture?
Well, yeah, people's relationship with the dead is obviously very culturally specific. That people feel differently for various reasons about how the dead should be treated, handled, disposed of, buried, etc. So yes, in North America, for historic reasons, it's highly problematic to engage with, to disturb Native burials. In different parts of the world, in Europe, in Spain, for example, there's a very different attitude toward the dead, the ancient dead at least, that they're objects of scientific inquiry, that they can be studied by professionals, that they can be analyzed, they can be sometimes displayed in museums. So I think that was one thing that was useful for the students to see, because many of their classes are based in anthropology and from a North American archaeological perspective, where they understand that you can't just go digging around with the dead. Here we were in a part of the world where there's a very different attitude. So there were no problems, let's say. They were treated, the dead, for better, for worse, were treated like objects of scientific study. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
it was definitely very shocking.
Yeah.
You have to come to the microphone if you want to say something.
Sorry. It was definitely very shocking to all of us, and I think I can say that speaking for my other peers that came along with us. And they had to take quite a bit of time to explain to us kind of that they don't have NAGPRA, it's like the like repatriation acts and other things like that in Spain. So it was very shocking for all of us, definitely.
Was there evidence of human or animal sacrifice, and did it increase with the drought?
Well, you know, the burials that we see here, we're assuming that they were not sacrifice, that they were part of an intentional, you know, non-sacrificial, and you know, sort of a process like normal dead, let's say non-sacrificial dead. But you might say there's no real way of knowing that, right? I mean, they're bodies that have been disposed of in a sort of formal way. It's quite possible that some of them were sacrifices and that did increase during this time. We don't have enough dates on animal remains for the site through this period, but that would actually be a really good way to find out, actually, if there was an intensification of animal sacrifice at this particular site. So I think that's on the sort of to-do in the future list, and a really good question, actually.
Great. What's the evidence for the changing availability of water at the site over time?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not a pollen scientist, but one of the interesting things about the cave at Castillejo del Bonete is that it preserves pollen and microfauna, sort of little animals, through the period of the site's use, and so within this sort of the record of the microfaunal record and the pollen record that's kind of found in that cave at Castillejo del Bonete, there is evidence of aridity, of drought. So the site itself preserves a record, of this event through these animals and plants. Yes, the pollen. Right.
You mentioned a period in which the dead were interred under people's homes, and so the question is, why would people choose to live above their dead?
That's a really good question. I worked in Iberia now almost 40 years, and I don't even think about that being sort of strange anymore, that some people might bury their dead under their house. But when I teach this material to students, they constantly remind me that, wait a second, this is weird from our perspective. We don't really know why the dead were buried under people's home in the early Bronze Age, and this was mainly in southeastern Spain. It's a pretty unusual practice. I could offer some ideas of my own, some of them including the idea that possibly this was a period of intense social stress, and maybe people wanted to make sure their dead were not disturbed, and what better way than to keep them under the house. Perhaps there was a different sense of the relationship between people and their ancestors, that they needed them in a more accessible way, and again, having them under their house floors. I know it seems strange to many of us, but there is, at least in North America, increasing practice to, for example, use cremated pieces of the dead and have them made into jewelry, for example. I don't know if you are aware of that. So, to me, that suggests a similar kind of practice, that people want to have their dead a little bit closer to them. So as exotic as this practice is, there perhaps hints of that kind of feeling, maybe even in our own lifeways. It is pretty unusual, but it was done. It was kind of normal for some people, yeah.
Great. Was the group, the students, you, Jacqueline, did you stay with a family while you were there? Was it a homestay? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about the family?
So we stayed, what would you call it?
Well, it was a building that was made as an old people's home, a retirement home, but not enough older folks from the town wanted to retire there. They wanted to stay in their old homes. So it was kind of unused or underused, and so we rented it, and yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of like a building, and there were a lot of different rooms. So we weren't with a family necessarily. We stayed by ourselves, and we were prepared for a lot lower conditions, worse conditions. We got there, and we pretty much all had our own bedrooms. We had air conditioning and showers that were easily accessible, and even a woman who cooked our meals for us, which was really amazing. And aside from that, there was also this very, very small town So of course, when we came in, we stuck out like sore thumbs, and everybody stared at us. And at first, it was a really odd feeling. But the town, after a couple weeks, really took us in, and they interacted with us in really interesting ways. That they, invited us to places. We went to the pool a lot, which at night was also a restaurant and a bar. But also kind of a meeting place for the entire community. And we got to interact with the community in that way, and to meet a lot of people, and to make all these really interesting friendships and learn a lot about that type of town. So that was cool.
The only problem with such luxurious conditions is that anywhere they go from here is going to be worse. So we set very high standards.
It was very nice.
It was very nice, very comfortable.
Did the 20th century Spanish Civil War ever come up in your conversations with locals?
That's a good question. That topic did not come up with locals. To be honest, I think you guys probably spent more time interacting with locals. What I was concerned about was a conversation about politics, contemporary politics in the U.S. or Spain. And I didn't have many interactions. So the Spanish Civil War, the archaeology of the Spanish Civil War did not really come up in my experience. I don't know if
Maybe
young
briefly,
people
but
did. Did you talk politics with any of your?
Not really.
Yeah.
Only maybe in passing.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so for the final question, we'll kind of return to scientific questions. Were you able to tell whether the agricultural revolution had reached La Mancha at the time of the cave burials, and was agriculture the reason for their concern about rainfall?
So farming reached the Iberian Peninsula, or it's kind of adopted in the Iberian Peninsula about 6,000, depends on the region, but around 6,000 BC. So farming was well in place, for thousands of years prior to the use of Castillejo de Monete. So yes, the farming revolution had already had taken hold. But of course, people had to adapt their farming to different kinds of environmental circumstances. So, when in periods of aridity or drought, people shifted the kinds of crops that they use, or shifted to more intensive use of herd animals. They became more mobile. But yes, in terms of agriculture, they were fully agricultural peoples by this time.
All right, so we've reached the end of the program. Let's give another round of thank you to Professor Katina Lillios. And also to Jacqueline O'Neill for helping out. Let me reiterate our gratitude to our sponsors, University of Iowa Honors Program, U of I Public Policy Center, International Programs, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their generous support. Also thanking today's special sponsors, Alice and Ken Atkinson, Conrad Schultz, Alan Swanson, and Blanca McCune Realtors. And thank you as well to City Channel 4, which makes our programs available to viewing audiences. Katina, as a small token of our appreciation, I'm pleased to present you with our coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug.
Wow.
Here you are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are adjourned.